I thought I was escaping everything when I moved to the country. The noise of the city, the constant rush, the stress, the chaos. The house I found was perfect, old, with creaky wooden floors, a large yard, and a view of the surrounding hills. It was isolated, yes, but that's exactly what I wanted. Peace. The first few days were a dream. I spent my time unpacking, organizing, and getting to know the quiet rhythm of the area. The neighbors waved occasionally when they passed by, but there was always something odd about them. They were friendly, but their smiles never reached their eyes. I didn't mind at first. It wasn't unusual for people to be reserved in small towns, right? But then I started hearing things. It started with whispers, soft, unintelligible, as if someone was talking just out of earshot. At night, when the house was still and the world outside was pitch black, the whispers came from within the walls. It sounded like a conversation, low voices, sometimes just a single word repeated over and over, like someone trying to get my attention. It made my skin crawl. I would wake up to find things out of place. A book turned sideways on the shelf. The curtains shifted slightly when I was certain I had closed them properly. And one night, I even found a mug on the kitchen counter, despite having put it away the evening before. Then the scratching began. It started faint, like nails scraping against wood. I thought it was a mouse at first, but the sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic. It came from the walls again. It was consistent, almost as if it was trying to get through. I tried to ignore it, but it only got worse. The scratching intensified, especially at night. By the third night, I couldn't sleep. The neighbors noticed my growing unease. One of them, an older woman named Mrs. Delaney, stopped by. She had a soft, tired smile and eyes that always seemed to be watching something beyond me. "You hear it too, don't you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Excuse me?" I replied, taken aback. "The scratching, the whispers, they've always been here." She paused, then added, "You'll get used to it, eventually." Her words sent a chill through me, but I smiled politely and nodded. I guess I'm still adjusting to the house. But the whispers didn't stop. They became clearer. Words began to form, my name being called, soft and distant at first, then louder, more insistent. I would hear it when I was alone in a room, as if someone was just behind me, just out of sight. One night, I finally decided to confront it. I waited until the house was still, my heartbeat echoing in the quiet. Slowly, I approached the wall where the scratching seemed to originate. The sound was deafening now, like nails against stone. I pressed my ear against the wall. Nothing but the scratching. And then, just as I was about to pull away, I heard a voice, low and hoarse, whispering right next to my ear. "Look." I froze, my breath caught in my throat. I slowly turned my head and looked at the wall. The surface was solid, but there was something wrong with it. The texture shifted slightly, as if it was breathing, rising and falling, just like a chest. That was when I saw them. Eyes. Dozens of them, tiny and almost imperceptible, embedded into the wall itself, blinking in and out of sight. The shapes of the eyes weren't clear, but I could feel them staring at me, feeling every inch of my body. I recoiled, heart pounding. The scratching stopped. I ran out of the room, unable to look back. I locked myself in the kitchen, trembling. The eyes followed me. The next day, I found myself avoiding the walls, avoiding the house as much as I could. I would go for long walks, trying to escape the oppressive weight of the place. The neighbors still watched, but this time they weren't waving. They were just staring. One afternoon, as I walked along the overgrown path at the edge of my property, I found something strange in the woods. It was a small structure, half buried in the earth, a dilapidated shack with crumbling wood and rusted metal. I had never seen it before, but it felt as if I had always known it was there. I ventured inside. The air was thick with decay. The walls were covered in symbols, scratched in, painted over, smeared with something dark. As I moved deeper into the shack, I found old furniture, covered in dust, and a journal lying open on a table. I picked it up, the pages brittle, yellow with age. The writing was frantic, desperate. They are watching me through the walls. They are waiting for me to see them. The eyes are everywhere. They are not human. They never were. The journal ended abruptly, the last page torn out. I was holding my breath, my hands shaking as I looked around the room. I needed to leave. But before I could turn to go, I heard a voice again, coming from behind me, from the walls of the shack itself. "You shouldn't have looked." I ran. The next few days passed in a blur. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. The eyes were always there, lurking just beneath the surface of the walls, watching, waiting. Every night, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. I couldn't escape them. I couldn't escape them. And then I saw one of them. Not through the wall, but standing in the hallway. A figure. Tall, shrouded in shadows, with hollow eyes staring at me. I screamed, but the figure didn't move. It didn't blink. It just stood there. "You've seen too much," it whispered, its voice a rasp like nails on glass. I bolted, slamming the door behind me. But no matter how far I ran, the eyes followed. The whispers never stopped. I don't know how long I've been here. Days? Weeks? I've stopped counting. The neighbors are all gone now, their houses abandoned, their doors wide open. The house is still here. The walls are still breathing. The eyes are still watching. And now, the walls are calling to me. Look. It was supposed to be a fresh start. When Sarah and I bought the old farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, I thought it would be the perfect escape. The city had become too much, too loud, too crowded. The stress was suffocating, and we both needed a change. The house was cheap, old but sturdy, and most importantly, it was isolated. No neighbors for miles, just acres of land and a small forest that bordered the property. The first week was idyllic. We spent our days cleaning, fixing up the place, and exploring the nearby woods. The house itself was charming, with creaky wooden floors and old brick fireplaces. There was something rustic and inviting about it, even though it felt like the house had been abandoned for a long time. But I loved the peace, the quiet. It was exactly what we needed. But there was something wrong about the place. It started with small things. Nothing overtly frightening, just odd occurrences. A picture frame would be out of place, or a door that I was sure I had locked would be wide open when I returned. At first, I shrugged it off as simple forgetfulness or the house settling. But then I noticed the whispers. At night, while we lay in bed, I could hear faint voices just outside the window. Soft, almost like a conversation. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was the wind rustling the trees, or maybe some wildlife moving through the brush. But every night, it happened. The voices grew clearer, almost as if someone was standing just on the other side of the window. Sarah heard them too. "I think we should leave," she said one evening, her voice shaking. "There's something wrong here, I can feel it." But I didn't want to leave. We had come so far to start over, and I wasn't ready to throw it all away. I tried to calm her down, to reassure her that it was all in our heads. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Then came the first night that everything changed. It was around 2:30 a.m. I woke up to the sound of the front door creaking open. The house was pitch black, and I could barely make out the shape of the door across the room. I sat up, heart pounding in my chest. The door was always locked at night. Sarah was still asleep beside me, so I slipped out of bed and grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand. I crept through the hallway, trying to stay quiet, but the floorboards groaned under my weight. I reached the front door and froze. It was wide open. The lock was still intact, but the door was open, the cold night air rushing in. I turned to Sarah, my breath shallow. She was still fast asleep, as though nothing had happened. I quickly closed the door and locked it, but the feeling of unease lingered. That wasn't the first time something strange had happened, but it was the first time it was so blatant. The next morning, Sarah was more on edge than usual. She refused to go outside, insisting that something was wrong with the house. I didn't want to believe her, but I could see the fear in her eyes. So, I decided to investigate further. I went into the basement to see if I could find any explanation for the strange occurrences. The basement was damp and smelled of mildew, but I wasn't worried. I had a flashlight, and I was determined to find out what was causing all the weird noises. As I descended the stairs, I noticed something odd. There were scratch marks on the walls, deep, uneven scratches, like something had been clawing at the stone. I ran my fingers along the marks, feeling the rough texture of the wall. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Then I saw it. In the far corner of the basement, there was a small door, almost hidden behind some old crates. It looked like it led to another room, one that wasn't on the floor plan. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pried open the door. What I found was not a room at all. It was a tunnel, a narrow, dark passage that seemed to stretch on forever. The air was thick and musty, and the walls were slick with moisture. I could barely see anything, but I could hear something, scratching, skittering, moving just out of reach. I ran back upstairs, slamming the basement door behind me. When I told Sarah about the tunnel, she didn't want to hear it. "We need to leave," she repeated, her voice trembling. "That place is alive. I can feel it." But I couldn't bring myself to leave. I felt like I was in too deep, like something was drawing me in. That night, I couldn't sleep. The whispers were louder now, not just outside the window, but inside the house. I could hear footsteps in the hall, the sound of someone walking just outside my bedroom door. I must have dozed off at some point, because the next thing I remember was waking up to the feeling of someone sitting on the bed beside me. I turned, expecting to see Sarah, but there was no one there. The temperature in the room dropped. My breath came out in clouds of mist. And then I saw it. A shadow. A figure standing in the doorway. It was tall and thin, its face obscured by darkness. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. It just stood there watching me. Finally it spoke. "You shouldn't have stayed." The voice was low, deep, and hollow, as though it came from the very walls themselves. I scrambled out of bed and turned on the light, but when I looked back, the figure was gone. The room was empty. The house was silent. That morning, Sarah was gone. I searched the house. I checked every room, every closet, the attic, the basement. She wasn't anywhere. But then I noticed something. The door to the tunnel in the basement was open again. And there, written on the floor in what looked like blood, were 2 words. "She's mine." I ran. I didn't stop. I left the house behind, never to return. I've tried to forget it, but every time I close my eyes, I hear the whispers. I see the shadow, and I feel the cold breath on my neck. And I know deep down that Sarah is still there,